chat, and our assistant students will be letting me know if there's a question or something. But I want to start by referring to some to a concept that I did not explain well in the recorded presentation. So what I'm going to say, it's important, and I'm going to reinforce this in the forum. I'm going to leave this in written. Well, in the recorded presentation on Cook's chapter, before I dive into the chapter itself, I make an introduction, a short introduction, to explain to you what generative grammar and universal grammar are from the point of view of the Chomskyan theory. And in slide number 7, which is the one we are seeing now, in the recorded session, good morning, Monse. In the recorded session,
good morning.
In the first bullet point, it says, Chomsky spoke of linguistic or language universals, and between brackets, I had added principles. And as you can see, now I have removed principles from the slide. In the recording session, I say twice, language universals, language principles. And that is a mistake because I'm presenting language universals as exact synonyms of language principles. And they are not exact synonyms. They are very, very similar. And in some cases, a language principle is a language universal, but not in all cases. I will give you an example. If we start by what we see here in slide 7, it says, Chomsky spoke of linguistic or language universals shared by all languages. For example, all languages identify nouns, verbs, adjectives. That is to say, all languages can speak of or will speak of objects, nouns, actions or states, or experiences, verbs, adjectives, qualities, right? Although there are languages, let me tell you, that lack adjectives. They don't have, they don't qualify nouns. But anyway, this is an example of a language universal because it exists, it's typical of any human language, right? But this, the fact that any human language will include reference to nouns, verbs, or adjectives, or as I was saying, objects, or persons, actions, or states, and adjectives, or ways of attributing qualities to things, is an example of a language universal. But then it says sentences in all languages must have a subject and a verb. This is an example of a language universal that at the same time is a language principle. So the first one I have analyzed is only an example of a language universal, but it's not a language principle. This second one is an example of a language universal that is a language principle. I will explain why in a second. And the last one, all languages express notions of past, present, and future, is also an example of a language universal, which is not a language principle. Now I explain why some are language principles and some are not. Because the theory, the Chomskyan theory we are studying, the principles and parameters theory, is a theory of syntax. And what do you understand by a theory of syntax? Or what do you understand by syntax? What is syntax? syntax is not semantics. Syntax has to do with the organization of clause elements in a sentence. So when in first year or at school do syntactic analysis, no wonder you have to identify or chunk sentences into subject and predicate, and then the head of the predicate and the elements inside the predicate, which depending on the verb will be either an object, a direct object, an indirect object, an adverbial, right? So all that has to do with syntax. In the theory of syntax, as you have seen, we study, for example, the pro-drop parameter, the fact that some languages can drop a subject, and some other languages, like English, cannot drop a subject. That's why they are called non-pro-drop languages. That belongs in the theory of syntax because that parameter has to do with the principle, the extended projection principle, that holds that all languages will have a subject and a verb. So in any human language, a sentence will have a subject and a verb. Speaking about those two constituents, which are the basic constituents of any sentence, we are speaking about the syntax of the sentence. But if I speak about the fact that all languages can express past, present, and future in different ways, for example, in Spanish, we do it by means of multiple verbal inflections. It's a highly inflected language that will add inflections to verbs to denote either present time, future time, or past time, while in English, there are very few inflections and time, past time, present time, and future time is expressed by means of adverbials. For example, I'm traveling now, I'm traveling tomorrow. There's no difference in the conjugation of verbs, is there? But there is a different time reference. Why is there a different time reference? Because of the adverbials. I'm traveling now, I'm traveling tomorrow. So time reference is expressed in English many a times by means of an adverbial and not by means of a verbal inflection. So to cut a long story short, I go back. And in case, I think there are some latecomers. In slide number 7 of my presentation, in the one you have in the class, uploaded in the class, originally it said Chomsky spoke of linguistic or language universals, and between brackets it said principles. And I even said language universals are principles. And now I'm self-correcting because I was not exact. Not all language universals are language principles, but language principles are language universals. Now, the difference will lie in whether, what is common to all languages has to do with the syntax in a sentence, the organization, like, for example, the structure dependency principle. That's another principle that has to do with the organization of clause elements in a sentence. So that's a principle. Like the extended projection principle that says that all sentences must have a subject and a predicate. But the fact that past, present, or future can be expressed by means of adverbials or verbal inflections is not a principle because it does not have to do with syntax. Is it clear? Can you answer in the chat whether you understood my point? Avísenme, chicas, si contestan.
Yes, it's clear, very clear. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, so that's something I wanted to make a point I also wanted to make a point about the fact that I wanted to die. I always want to die when I listen to myself. I'm sure it also happens to you. The voice is like strange, you sound awful, but well, that would not be the problem, or that my pronunciation is not fantastic. Well, I'm not very happy about that, but that was not the problem. The problem was that I made a couple of mistakes, of grammatical mistakes, and I wanted to kill myself. On 3 instances, I said I used the preposition to followed by an infinitive instead of follow or using an ing form. For example, in the second 52 of the presentation, el segundo 52, I said, now I'm going to, it said something like, I'm going to move on to sharing something with you, and I said to share. I'm going to move on, something like that, to share with you, and it's to sharing, because it's to doing something, not to do something, right? Something similar in the minute 1.16, I also said to share, and I should have said to sharing, okay? Well, sometimes, or last year, when I recorded this, well, it was very difficult to record all these things, and whenever I noticed a mistake, I would start all over again. But that meant hours and hours, and so I stopped self-correcting, and I just decided to point out the mistakes if there were any. Okay, good. Well, I don't know if there's any question on Vivian Cook's chapter. What I would like to say about this chapter, if there are no questions, is that the most important thing, I mean, if I had to summarize this chapter, of course, you have to read it many times, and you should know the details. But anyway, if I had to summarize some important, vital parts of the chapter, what you should have learned and what you should remember forever is the difference between basic grammar and the grammar we learn at school. This also applies to the chapter by Randolph Querkenstein, which is simpler, much simpler, but it tackles the same issue, let's say, or topic. The difference between what is basic grammar and what is the grammar we learn at school. So basic grammar is this innate grammar Chomsky speaks about. Is this capacity any human being or the brain of any human being has to be able to organize sounds, all the sounds, the noises, let's say, because at the beginning they are noises for little babies, how they can organize all those sounds or all that noise into organized language. That is to say, we have a wired system, Chomsky says, that is like a template, you understand, a template where you can organize language syntactically. That is to say, I don't know if you have, I don't think you remember what you felt when you started studying English, but if you are studying any other language, if you are beginning to study French or German, or if it has ever happened to you, or if you watch a film in a Nordic language or in Chinese, what is the first sensation we all get? What is the sensation you get when you hear a language You cannot speak at all. ¿Qué sensación tienen? Frustration. And why, Maria? Why frustration? What actually happens to you? Let's do it with a film. You watch a film with no subtitles in, I don't know, in which language. It could be in Danish. ¿Qué es lo que no podemos hacer o qué es lo que todos sentimos que pasa?
Well, I cannot differentiate words, like when
Exactly.
the one word begin and finish and begins the following one. It's like I cannot differentiate. It's like
Perfect.
a mass of sounds. I cannot differentiate anything.
Excellent. That's the perfect answer. What happens to us is that it's a continuum. We can hear a continuum of words, sounds, but we can't tell one sentence from another, let alone the subject from the predicate, right? So that is what happens to babies when they are born, before they are born, when they are in their mother's wombs. They are exposed to that. But how come that when they are 2 years old, sometimes earlier, but when they are 2 or 3, they can already organize all those sounds and they can make grammatical correct sentences. They cannot add up, they cannot subtract, that is to say, they cannot handle mathematics when they are 2 or 3 years old. Can they? No. But they can understand what you say, and they can produce an infinite number of sentences which will be grammatically correct. But grammatically correct from which point of view? From the point of view of syntax. And this is what, and probably we could go to, we could share the other presentation, How Do We Learn Grammar, because there are some examples there. I don't know if, I think Sophie has the other presentation, How Do We Learn Grammar. Instead of sharing this one, we are going to change the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so a little kid, a little child can produce, when he or she is 2 years old, for example, or 3, an infinite number of grammatical sentences. Are you following me? So a very important concept, something that is very, yes. Who is asking something?
Oh, this is Sophia. Yeah, I just wondered.
Ah, Sofía. It says Sofía está presentando. Todavía no lo vemos, pero es como que está arrancando. Okay, don't worry. I'll keep on talking until it works. So what is very important for you to understand is the difference between a sentence that is grammatical and a sentence that has grammar mistakes, which is different, right? One thing is to have an ungrammatical sentence, and another thing is to have a sentence that has grammar mistakes. So, for example, if I said, or let's move on, let's have a look at the examples we have here. I think it's also slide number 7. There, yes, go back. The one before, there. Randolph work, and you have worked with this, exemplifies what can be ungrammatical and what is not ungrammatical by means of this example. Eric and I, or something like that, bide. No, it's not the sentence here, but it said, Eric and I buy lots of things. Remember? I don't know if that sentence, maybe it's in the previous slide so that we can see the one that is grammatical. There, thank you. It says, Randolph Quirk illustrates this knowledge of grammar with an authentic remark by a 5-year-old. Eric and me just buy lots of things. Now, if you were teaching English at a private institute and a student produced this sentence, most teachers would say that the student has made lots of grammar mistakes, and it's true, right? But if you know more grammar, that is to say, if you pay attention to what basic grammar is, this student knows a lot of English, even though he or she is at the beginning of the process. And much more if we are speaking about a native speaker, a 5-year-old native speaker. So, as it says here, I was able to read this sentence very easily. Eric and me just buy lots of things. But when I wanted to read the other example, can you move on the next slide again? I couldn't read it. I don't know if you realized. I thought this was the correct example, the slide I wanted to work with. And when I wanted to read it, I could not read it. I started by Eric just lots me things, and this sentence has exactly the same words as the sentence in the previous slide. However, this sentence is ungrammatical. Why is it ungrammatical? Because of what? What is wrong here?
Because I think that one thing sentence,
Yeah.
and another thing is a grammatical mistake from the point of view of traditional grammar. And I also think that grammaticality is a consequence of universal grammar, what we were talking
Exactly.
about. That is what we produce grammatical sentence, because we have these built-in principles and parameters. So it is because we have a universal grammar and a system in our brain that allows us to organize the word.
Exactly, Karen. And Jacqueline also said because of syntax. Yes, because of this. I mean, this is a theory. There are other authors that don't believe in this theory, but I think it's a very good one. And since Chomsky presented it, I mean, it has been very controversial, but it keeps, I mean, it still holds, and many people still study it and try to criticize it, but some other times they can see that it makes a lot of sense. So you don't need to go to school to produce the sentence that the kid produced in the previous slide. And even if you have never been to school, even if you are illiterate, completely illiterate, you are an Englishman or a person who was born in an Anglophone country, no matter how poor or illiterate he or she is, they will never produce this sentence, right? Karen says, ungrammaticality is the giveaway. The giveaway es como lo que delata that there's a universal grammar and that we don't need to be taught grammar because we already know it. Exactly. But there are two grammars. Is that clear? So far, I think up to fourth year, I'm sure you have always thought of grammar as, well, the type of grammar we teach at university, the prescriptive approach, the rules, what is right, what is wrong. But this is different. Let's go back to the previous slide again. The one with correct there. Eric and me just buy lots of things. How many things does this speaker handle thanks to built-in grammar? Who can tell me? What can this boy do thanks to built-in grammar? Why is the sentence understandable, let's say? What can he handle? Any volunteers? Traten de participar aunque se equivoquen, porque es el momento para equivocarse. Es mejor equivocarse ahora y no en un parcial o en un examen. No tiene nada de malo si lo que dicen después no tiene nada que ver, porque gracias a eso que digan van a aprender. Okay? Let's see, Sophia. Sophia said something before. What does not follow the structure dependency? The previous one, yes. Yeah, the previous one was a real miss. Any comments? What can we detect? How
Hello?
much grammar does this? Yes, who is speaking?
Catherine.
Hello, Catherine. Okay, what is it that this boy knows?
I think the boys can understand that in English we need a subject, and that's why he started the sentence using Eric and Niece.
A subject and what else? In English and in all languages. According to the extended projection principle, a sentence will have a subject and a verb. Very good, yes. And what else does he know? Apart from the fact that in all sentences, it should have a they should have, or there should be a subject and a verb.
Maybe,
What
for
else?
example, the use of just in the present perfect tense.
Catherine, but connected to subject and verb.
Oh, yes, sorry.
There's something else you could have added.
Objects, too.
Well, yeah, depending on the verb, objects, yes, you're right, which is the case here because the verb is transitive. So in this kind of template we have in our brains, we know that when verbs are transitive, they require objects. This is something we are going to see more in depth when we see the theory of predicates and arguments, but also the order, Catherine and everybody. The unmarked word order is subject-verb, not verb-subject. He didn't start just by lots of things, Eric and me. He knew the order. Is that clear? The unmarked order. Well, and then as Catherine was saying, you were saying something about tenses. What is it that you were saying?
Eric, this guy. I can't remember his name. Uses just in the present continuous, just before the verb in the past, by and not after.
But it's not the present continuous. It's
present
perfect.
Sorry.
Present perfect. Yes, but for example,
Can I add something?
Bide. It should be bought, right? So
Yes.
what is it that he does not know, and what is it that he does know? I'm asking Catherine and anybody. Anybody can also say.
Can I?
Karen, yes, Karen.
Okay, that he knows the inflection of regular verbs. So the mistake he made in conjugating the irregular verb by in the past participle tell us that he knows that regular lexical verbs take the id inflection in past tenses.
ED inflection. So what he does not know in a way is lexis, vocabulary in a way, because of course the fact that a verb can be regular or irregular pertains to grammar, let's say, regular and irregular verbs. But he does know about suffixation and what type of suffix should be added to a verb. It's not, he didn't add an ing form because he knew it was present perfect, let's say. He knew it had past time reference. So he didn't choose an S form or an ing form, but he needs to acquire vocabulary. And so learning that some verbs are irregular and learning the form of the irregular verb, it's a question of memory and studying. So it's what happens in Spanish as well, in any language. Cuando los niños dicen, por ejemplo, el juguete está rompido o se ha rompido el juguete. Entonces, por analogía, porque la mayoría de los verbos regulares pueden tener ese tipo de forma en el caso del participio, de los participios regulares, lo ha comido, ha jugado, se ha perdido, se ha rompido, no. Justo este es irregular, entonces lo que tiene que estudiar, lo que tiene que aprender, y para eso sí hace falta o ir al colegio o la instrucción de un adulto, es la forma. ¿Sí? Pero eso no tiene que ver con la gramática básica, con built-in grammar. So, all this, what I'm doing now, or what we are trying to do, is make you aware of this difference in the different grammars, okay? What universal grammar is, what basic grammar is, and then the other grammars, which, by the way, there was another task you had to do for today, and I was reading them, reading what you wrote, is you had to read about different grammatical approaches. We have the prescriptive approach, the descriptive approach, then there are semantic approaches that pay more attention to meaning, right? And you had to decide which was the approach you thought we were going to use in this subject more frequently. Well, in fact, there are two approaches. There are three approaches we are going to be using, but there are two we use all the time. The first one, and we do it in this order. The first one is a descriptive approach. Why descriptive? Because we always give you two forms, either two sentences, two texts, in general they are sentences or clauses that denote exactly the same meaning in English and in Spanish. But what is it that we make you do? We make you describe what you can see. And that is, try and think of the first exercise you had, the grammatical consciousness raise, the awareness raising exercise. Remember the awareness raising exercise in which you had to describe what you could see in English and in Spanish. In English, all sentences have a subject pronoun. Even sentences in which the subject pronoun doesn't have any reference. It's it's an expletive, what we call an expletive, an empty it, an empty there. But you could see that because English is a non-prodrop language, you need the subject pronoun or an expletive should be present. But then when you compared with Spanish and you described the Spanish construction, you could see that many a time the subject pronoun, and it's important to say, it's better to say the subject pronoun, not simply the subject pronoun has been omitted, right? And we can recover the identity of the subject by through the verbal inflection. So that is descriptive grammar. Are you following me? What you do is you describe what you see. Is that clear? So the first approach is always descriptive, and we not only describe them, we make you aware of the differences. We make you pay attention to the differences. We make you think about why we use the pronoun se so many times in Spanish. Well, and in English, an equivalent pronoun only in the case of reflexive verbs. So that is describing and at the same time applying the approach of grammatical consciousness raising. Are you following me? Okay, so the first approach we will always be applying is descriptive approach. Then, when you have to justify, because we tell you, you should describe the two choices, decide if the constructions are correspondent or not, because precisely you are comparing and contrasting through description, but then we ask you to justify your choice, to justify why you have used, for example, why you have translated a periphrastic passive voice, English passive voice, by means of a pasiva con se in Spanish. You have to justify that. And when you justify it, you do it by giving rules, resorting to rules, right? And that is an example of prescriptive grammar. Is that clear? And so you would say, well, I cannot translate this ing form in English by means of a gerundio in Spanish, because this ing form in English has adverbial function, and the gerundio in Spanish has, sorry, this ing form in English has nominal function or adjectival function, and the gerundio in Spanish can only have adverbial function. And that's a rule. Or, for example, when you say in a sentence like, there's a dog at the gate, hay un perro en el portón, while in English you have two subjects, an expletive, a grammatical subject, and the real subject. Let's say you have two subjects. In Spanish, there is no subject, and the verb haber is a transitive verb. Therefore, un perro is the direct object. And if you say that un perro is the subject, that will be wrong. It's a mistake from the prescriptive point of view. Because even if we understand, even if the meanings, of course the meanings are the same, we must convey the same meaning. The rules in Spanish say that the verb haber is a transitive verb, that it constitutes, when it's used in its third person form, in la forma tercio personal, it will make up an impersonal sentence, and that whatever exists is the direct object. And that's prescription. That's a rule. That's not descriptive. That's prescriptive. And you should know it. Why? Because you're going to be professionals of the language. And so you not only have to be very fluent and very accurate in your use of Spanish, but you should know the rules. Saber las reglas para traducir bien a veces quizás no haga falta, pero ustedes van a ser profesionales de la lengua. Tienen que saber todo. Por eso se los exigimos. And so that is a prescriptive approach. And finally, sometimes, especially in the theory of predicates and arguments, we are going to be applying a semantic approach. For example, we'll be paying attention to the thematic roles of the different participants in a sentence. So you will be paying attention to not just to the syntactic function, but to the semantic function. So I love her. I is not simply the subject, is an experiencer. Because when you love someone, you're not doing anything on purpose. You are experiencing a feeling of love. I work a lot. In that case, the subject, which will be the thematic role of the subject, agent, because you're doing something. I work a lot. But if in the passive voice, if you said I was tricked by you or whatever, I is patient. And there I'm applying a semantic approach. Why is it important? Because sometimes these type of approaches help you understand the meaning of a syntactic function better and be able to translate it in the correct way. So far, so good? Am I clear? Can you follow me?
Yes.
Okay, no,
Yes.
no questions? So, remember, not all sentences are ungrammatical, and we are going to be paying attention to ungrammaticality in order to be able to say that no native speaker, we can say that no native speaker will produce an ungrammatical sentence because we are born with a built-in system in our brains that is capable of organizing language syntactically, okay? And that is common to all languages. Cook also says, connected to this, that we can say that syntax is innate. Syntax is innate. But vocabulary is learned. Can you understand that? Can you understand that? Syntax is innate and vocabulary is learned. Can you see the difference? Yes, excellent. And that, I don't think I will have much time to speak about or to answer questions on the chapters by Pinker from the book, The Language Instinct. You have to read How Language Works, which is, in a way, I mean, it deals with the same topic, of course, very similar to how do we learn grammar, but because Pinker is a semanticist, let's say, a cognitivist, cognitivism also pays attention to semantics, okay? He approaches the topic a little bit differently, but he speaks basically about the same things. And in the Tower of Babel, you can say the Tower of Babel or the Tower of Babel, at the very beginning of the chapter, well, first there's a summary of this biblical episode, let's say, or parable of what happened at the Tower of Babel, right? When God made everybody speak different languages and then they wouldn't understand one another. But the chapter opens by saying almost at the very beginning, it says, it quotes Chomsky, and it says, according to Chomsky, a visiting Martian scientist, o sea, si viniera un científico de Marte, un marciano, a visiting Martian scientist would surely conclude that, aside from their mutual unintelligible vocabularies, earthlings, that is to say, nosotros, los terráqueos, speak a single language. This quote is very important and very, I mean, it's a metaphor that I think that clarifies or further explains this concept of universal grammar. Look, according to Chomsky, a visiting Martian scientist would surely conclude that aside from their mutual unintelligible vocabularies, earthlings speak a single language. Who can explain that quotation? If you happen to have the chapter, is on page 232 of the original book. before the list of features that are common to some languages and different from others. Macarena said she can explain this, or when she said yes, I think, I don't know what she was answering. Who dares explain this quotation, or don't you understand it? ¿La entienden o no? So, dice Ruth. That is to say, let's imagine you go to study, you want to study another language, right? You say, well, I'm going to study Russian. Can anybody speak Russian? Anybody, or have you ever studied Russian?
No.
No. I made a course once, 2 months, and I felt at first grade, because you know that they have a different alphabet. So I felt like little kids drawing the letters. But anyway, cuando uno, lo voy a decir en español, cuando uno estudia un idioma que no conoce para nada, ¿qué es lo que espera? A ver, ¿qué esperan aprender ustedes cuando van a estudiar un idioma? La pregunta es como muy obvia, pero es importante para que entiendan esta quote. Cuando uno estudia un idioma, ¿qué espera ver en el programa? ¿Qué sé yo, en el programa de estudio? ¿Qué espera ver en primer año, en segundo? A ver, alguno hable, porque si no me aburro de hablar sola yo todo el tiempo. Poder entender a los nativos. Sí, muy bien, Lourdes, pero para poder entenderlo, ¿qué esperas que te enseñe la profe o el profe? ¿Quién está hablando, Luciana? Vocabulario. Pero, Luciana, ¿vos esperas que te den todos los años listas de vocabulario y nada más?
No, nada más no, pero digamos, lo principal. Lo que uno espera.
Bueno, es como lo más difícil. Muy bien. Vocabulario, cómo se pronuncia. Pero
entender el funcionamiento de ese...
¿Qué esperas que te enseñen? Mercedes dice, how to use verb tenses. O sea que si vos esperas que te enseñen how to use verb tenses, ¿qué es lo que asumís que toda lengua va a tener? Si uno dice, bueno, a ver cuántos tiempos, que me enseñan tiempos verbales, ¿por qué ustedes piensan que en ruso hay distintos tiempos verbales? ¿Sí o no? Uno lo asume. También, ¿cómo armar una oración? Muy bien, sí. ¿Cómo armar qué tipo de oración, Lourdes? ¿Cuáles son los tipos de oración que decía? A ver, ¿cómo se armará qué? Por ejemplo, una pregunta, una negación. ¿Cómo se niega? ¿Cómo se hace una pregunta? ¿Cómo es la voz pasiva y la activa? ¿Cómo paso de activa a pasiva? ¿Cuáles son los adverbios? ¿Cuáles son los pronombres? Entonces, ¿qué quiere decir eso? Que todos hablamos una misma lengua, en realidad. ¿Por qué? Porque toda lengua humana, no estoy hablando de la lengua que pueden tener los delfines, o no estoy hablando de la música, que puede ser un tipo de lengua, o la matemática, álgebra puede ser un tipo de lengua, entre comillas. No es una lengua humana. Entonces, en toda lengua humana, uno espera que le enseñen pronombres, tiempos verbales, cómo se hace una pregunta, cómo cambia el orden para hacer la pregunta, porque sabe que el orden va a ser distinto. ¿Pero por qué sabes que el orden va a ser distinto? Gracias a this built-in grammar that tells you that an affirmative sentence will not have the same organization as an interrogative sentence in most of the cases. Pero lo que va a ser bien diferente, y ahí entiendo, creo, Luciano, que voy a contestar lo que vos dijiste, lo que más me espera que no va a tener nada que ver, que no va a tener un parangón, sería el vocabulario. Es lo que va a ser, pero completamente diferente, ¿sí? Entonces, las lenguas humanas en realidad son una sola. Lo que varía es el vocabulario. Y por supuesto, y es lo que van a ver cuando lean Pinker, algunas otras cosas, porque las lenguas se dividen, se organizan por tipologías. So you have languages that are inflected and which inflect all verbs. For example, in Spanish, we inflect verbs to show tense, number, and sometimes aspect. While in English, we inflect verbs to show tense, but not aspect, and number only sometimes, in the case of the verb to be, or in the simple present tense, the third person singular, the S shows is singular form. It's the only one. In Russian, verbs not only denote all those meanings, but also gender. So, depending on whether you are a man or a woman, you will conjugate the verb differently. But that, I think, happens only in the past. Well, Russian is a headache. Let's see, Karen says, empecé este año a estudiar alemán y lo primero que nos dijo la profe es que no debíamos omitir el sujeto como en español. Perfecto, la profe, muy bien, sin darles, porque todos los que estudian alemán, muchos estudiaron para viajar, son médicos y quieren saber alemán, no les interesa tanto la lingüística tan en detalle, pero lo que la profesora hizo es hacerles ver que el alemán is a non-pro-drop language, because German, of course, belongs in the family of Germanic languages, just like English and Danish, for example. But then you have the languages that are the Romance languages that derive from Latin, which are except for French, and in a way Portuguese. The rest of the Romance languages are non-pro-drop. Are pro-drop. We can drop the subject pronoun. In French, I know little French. I'm sure here many of you maybe can speak good French, but in French they have grammatical subjects like llueve, il pleut. Si lo pronuncié mal, bueno, me corrigen, pero ese il es un expletivo, igual que el it del inglés, y en alemán es es. Es regnet. Es un expletivo también. Pero en español simplemente decimos llueve. Y en italiano creo que es piove, algo así. En portugués también. Pero el francés y el portugués, debido a la oralidad, a la pronunciación de las inflexiones verbales en la oralidad, que se ha ido como, si bien en la parte escrita, cada verbo tiene su inflexión, la inflexión correspondiente a la persona y número, en la oralidad muchas veces la pronunciación es la misma o casi la misma, eso hace que necesiten retener el sujeto. En francés y en portugués, si ustedes prestan atención, el portugués usa muchísimo el você, eu, você, no como nosotros, que solamente en algunos casos, y ya vamos a ver cuándo, porque hay veces que necesitamos retener los pronombres, ¿sí? Esto que estoy hablando de las tipologías de lenguas y de las familias de lenguas, es decir, si algunos de ustedes han estudiado o estudian el profesorado y tienen historia de la lengua, que es una materia divina, se habla de lo que es la lengua proto-indo-europea, proto-indo-European language, from which different languages emerged, like the Germanic language and Latin, and then when these languages died, because you know that languages are alive, and so they are born and they may die or evolve in different languages. Well, we have, in the case of Latin evolved in 5 different languages. Because the Romans, and this you studied in Culture 1, because I think the Romans had their empire was spread all over Europe, the Latin language was spoken in many countries, even in England, right? That's why in English we have so many words of Latin origin, especially in the field of science, because it was the language of the academy, let's say. But when the Roman Empire fell and they would not send any more military troops or whatever to their colonies, let's say the communities were left isolated, and Latin began to evolve in a different way. So, en Portugal, por ejemplo, el portugués europeo, que es un poco diferente al portugués brasilero, la variedad cambia bastante, pero sigue siendo la misma lengua por la gramática, es un estadio, es un tipo de español antiguo, es como que quedó estancado en cierta época de su evolución. En cambio, el español de España siguió evolucionando de manera diferente y se convirtió en español. ¿Por qué? Porque las gramáticas cambiaron, son bien diferentes las gramáticas. El género de los distintos sustantivos, la forma de conjugar los verbos. Pero son dos lenguas de la misma raíz. Entonces tenemos portugués, español, italiano, francés. ¿Y cuál es la quinta lengua romance?
Rumano.
Rumano, muy bien. El año pasado tuvimos una estudiante rumana con nosotros en este curso. Ahora hay una estudiante rumana en la otra comisión de gramática contrastiva. De paso les cuento que hace 2 años nos aceptaron somos socios en un proyecto, en un convenio Erasmus con la Universidad de Alexandru Cuza en Rumania. Y bueno, y los rumanos, la lengua, lo poco que pude aprender con la alumna que tuvimos el año pasado es que, bueno, no solo que es muy parecida a español y entendí por qué es lengua romance, porque yo antes el rumano me lo imaginaba como una lengua eslava, pero es más parecido al italiano todavía. Y ahora tenemos como 5 rumanas cursando de manera virtual y casi todas haciendo materias de italiano. Y son muy de ir a Italia, etcétera, etcétera. Pero la estudiante que tuvimos, yo después si puedo les voy a mostrar una presentación que ella hizo sobre el gerundio en español y el gerundio en rumano, y sobre los verbos de movimiento en rumano y en español, y realmente muy parecido al español y más que nada al italiano. O sea que el rumano es la quinta lengua romance. Okay, but this is also connected to the very first task you had to do. You had to read a short introductory text on comparative versus contrastive linguistics. And precisely, the genetic relatedness of languages, which is what I'm speaking about now, is the object of study of comparative linguistics or of contrastive linguistics. Now I'm asking you, which of the two linguistics studies the genetic relatedness, the family bonds between languages? Comparative linguistics or contrastive linguistics? Comparative linguistics. Have you read the text at the beginning of the comparative linguistics? Exactly. It studied the relatedness, the evolution of languages, how languages change, and so on and so forth. English, you know, comes from the Anglo-Saxon language that is Old German. So if Karen is studying German, I'm sure you must have realized how similar it is to English. However, German has many more declensions and cases and this and that used to exist in English, and now they don't exist any longer. Now, contrastive linguistics studies what? So comparative linguistics, the genetic relatedness. And contrastive linguistics, which is what we are doing in this subject. We call it contrastive grammar, but in fact is contrastive linguistics, compares what, studies what, sorry, me quedan 15 minutos, nos quedan. What is it that, what is the object of study of contrastive linguistics? Have you read the first text? What is the object of study of contrastive linguistics? Okay, that's a question for next class. If nobody answers, that's a question for next class. What we are going, it describes between, yeah, no, but yes, Catherine, but no, I want next class, I want a good answer on that. It's a very short text. You can read it. You can do extensive reading.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, let's leave it for next, Karen, let's leave it for next class.
Okay, my internet wasn't working.
It's an important question, and I want everybody to do some little research on that. So what is the object of study of contrastive linguistics? Okay, now, I don't know whether it's Sophia or Carla or Monse, I need you to share the feedback on the wiki. There are some comments I want to make. While the girls look for the article to share, I don't know if there's any question. Okay. Before I go over my comments, I want to ask you something. What was what you did, this wiki, what was the experience like? How did you feel doing it? Any comment, any reaction to this type of exercise? Any positive or negative aspect it may have? No comments? Okay. I didn't understand what I had to do. That's a good comment, but it's okay that you say it. You had to, Maria, the idea is the following. As I always said, this is contrastive linguistics, contrastive grammar, but in fact, it is applied linguistics. So we want you to apply the theory to practical matters. Queremos que todo lo que leen lo bajen y lo apliquen a la traducción, ya sea mediante la descripción de construcciones parecidas, de distintas maneras. Entonces, por eso les dimos estos ejercicios, que son como unos ejercicios un poco pavos, si se quiere, la palabra, el adjetivo, como medio que uno dice para qué son, pero en realidad son para hacerlos ejercitar, para que ustedes ejerciten lo que es la descripción, la gramática descriptiva. Is that clear? So group A had to work with an exchange. I think it was the one of the feet and the fixes. The dialogue said, what's that? An adult asks a little girl, Kate, what's that? And Kate answers, a footsie. But as a matter of fact, the adult is pointing at one of her feet. But then the adult points to both feet and says, what are these? And the little girl answers, two footsies. Footsies meaning like piecitos, right? It's like baby talk. And then the little girl corrects herself and she says, no, two feetsies, I mean. And so the question was, analyze these instances so as to assess how much grammar has been learned and how much remains to be learned. Well, group 1 made a very nice analysis. Escuchen, no, esto que yo comparto ahora no es para que se sientan, digamos, no quiero que se sientan ni mal, ni bien, ay, no, me puse incompleto, o este le puso excelente, a mí no me puso. En realidad es para que aprendan de sus compañeros y para que vean bien qué esperamos de ustedes. ¿Está claro eso? ¿Les molesta que yo comparta así? No quiero que nadie se sienta mal porque yo comparto una corrección. ¿Hay alguien que se oponga? Me lo tiene que decir ahora. No, bien. Bueno.
No, profe, para nada.
Bueno, perfecto. Who would like, I don't know if there's any member of Group A who would like to read their analysis, which is a descriptive analysis. Is there any of the members here who would like to read this? No?
Yes,
Who is? Maria,
Eugenia.
are you one of the members?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Maria Eugenia, can you read?
As all kids who are 2
Read it.
years and a half old, Kate has not received formal instruction on grammar. Therefore, we can infer that all her learning has been done unconsciously and taken from her environment, that is, from family members, peers, etc. To begin
Wait a
with,
second, Maria Eugenia. Wait a second. I have just realized that this is not exact and I didn't mark it as such. Because it says, we can infer that all her learning has been done unconsciously. Yes, it's unconscious because she was born with that grammar. But then it says, untaken, the part that says untaken from her environment, that is from the family members, peers. Well, that is not exact because the knowledge she has is partly taken, if you want, from prompts that family and peers may give, but most of it comes from also from this built-in grammar, okay? So that is not incorrect, but not exact because it doesn't happen in all the cases. Go on, Maria Eugenia.
to begin with, we can identify that she knows the basic English sentence.
The basic
English sentence structure, subject plus verb, when she says, I mean, to clarify her message. Secondly,
okay, so that comes from universal grammar, built-in grammar. It's knowledge of syntax. Go on.
Secondly, we can also see that Kate has a certain understanding of plural forms when she mentions 2 footsies by adding s at the end of the noun. Furthermore, she then corrects herself and uses the irregular plural form of foot, but fails to remove the s when switching to the irregular form feet. As we can
okay,
see,
this is something she must have learned from the environment, from her family. For sure, she must have heard once and again, and this is positive, positive evidence that the plural of foot is feet and not feet. That is something she has not learned. She has not been born with that knowledge because this is a knowledge that is acquired. It's almost lexis, vocabulary. Is that clear? Are you following me? Okay, go on, Eugenia.
as we can see in these examples, she uses colloquial language such as feces, which is usually in kids, especially that age. Finally, Kate uses articles and quantifiers correctly, positioning them before nouns and according to the number, for example, when she says a footsie and 2 feetsies.
Okay, very good. It was very good. And then there was the group that revised on it. I don't know if you can scroll down so that we can see, at least I cannot see what. Adds something and they say, As stated by Hyams, children often produce utterances without mentioning the subject of the sentence. For instance, in Kate's answers, a footsie and two footsies, we noticed that she did not make use of an explicit subject and verb. And I wrote, this is not exact. Yes, it's not exact because it's implied in the conversation. So one thing is to simply say feet in the air or a footsie, I don't know. And another thing is when it's a reply. So if I say something like, for example, what would you like to have for lunch? And you answer spaghetti, you are not, this is not an instance of omission of the subject. There's ellipsis because it's understood through the context. It's a dialogue. Is that clear? That's not a case of subject pronoun omission. So I appreciate the revision you did, but this is useful so that you understand that in the case of a question and an answer, when you give a short answer, you are not omitting the subject pronoun. Okay, then we go, we can skip some of the, for example, group 9, there were some, I will tell you. Yes, group 9. Group 9 had to speak about, had to analyze these nonsensical, in a way, nonsensical sentences Randolph Quirk uses to illustrate the importance of syntax. Ahora que encuentro el capítulo. It's on page, I think it's 179 of the original chapter. Randolph Quirk lists a series of sentences like in a strange language, and some of them really look very nonsensical. For example, the very first one, before I go to this, the very first one, example number 1, under the title, The Use of Nonsense. In example number 1, he gives this example. Croatation, angleshably, Polanians, plickful, ragling, plum, read, will, the, in, be, the. That is totally ungrammatical, difficult to read. It's similar to the example I read at the beginning of the class, the one about the boy that was ungrammatical. It's ungrammatical, very ungrammatical, but at the same time, we could say that this could be an English-like language, couldn't we? It sounds like English because of the type of inflections, proitation, because there are some auxiliary verbs like will or articles there, but the sentence makes no sense. Later on, in example number 2, using this crazy language, he says, plumb the plickful croatation will be ragling Polanians angleshably in the ribs. Have you understood anything of what I have just read of number 2? Plumb the plickful croatation will be ragling Polanians. No, it's not understandable. However, tell me which of the 2 examples sounds clearer or sounds more logical, 1 or 2? One is croatation, angleshably, Polanians, plickful, ragling, plumb, read, will, the, in, be, the. And number 2, plumb the plickful croatation will be ragling Polanians, angleshably, in the read. The second one. Do you agree? Do you agree with us that the second one makes more sense? What is it that we don't know about the second one? We don't know the words, the meaning of words, but it's syntactic, it's grammatical. We can realize there's a syntactic organization underneath. Is that clear? Then he keeps on working, playing with these words And what group 9 and 10 had to work with was with examples, with the columns. B of examples 2. Example 2 was this one, Plum the Plikful. And example 5, probably the young publisher will be reading manuscripts through in the evening. It said the arrangements 2 and 5 contain columns of nouns, adjectives, and verb phrases that are fixed or in relation to one another. However, columns A and F, that is plum, probably, suddenly, that it's A, and F is unglachably, shyly, through, adverbial phrases. And then you said G, noun phrase acting as a circumstantial, in the read, in the street, in the evening. What's the problem with the last one, noun phrases acting as circumstantials? G is also an example of adverbial phrases. So A, F, and G, all of them are adverbial phrases. Adverbial phrases, not adverbs. Not adverbs working as adverbials or circumstantials, but adverbial phrases. They're all adverbials. Is that clear? All of them are movable. So what you say is, they permit some mobility in the clause. All of them, that's true. Adverbials can have mobility, no matter whether they are made up of adverbs or of noun phrases. Then later on at the end it says, by changing the common or marked word order, I think that what you meant is by changing the unmarked word order or the canonical word order. No se habla de common word order. Y marked es el marcado, el que no es usual. Yo creo que lo que ustedes quieren decir acá es el que es usual. Canonical or unmarked word order. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I think there were no comments in this one. It was fine. Let's move on to the next one. Number 7. This one, for example, we can say a round table or he rounded the bend. So round as an adjective, rounded as a verb. But plikful is likely to have only one grammatical function, but it says is likely to have one grammatical function. It doesn't say only has one grammatical function. Is likely. Which one? And you say plikful is likely to be an adjective due to its morphological derivation. But why does it say likely? Why doesn't it say, plikful does have only one grammatical function? So in the sentence, in this crazy sentence, it says, Plum the plikful croatation will be wrangling Polanians. The function, the likely function is that of an adjective, but not because of the morphological derivation, because full could also be a suffix in a noun, like a spoonful of sugar. Am I right? You can speak of a mouthful of food. So there are words ending in full, which are not adjectives. So that is not the only reason why it's an adjective. There's a syntactic reason. In which is a syntactic reason? That apparently it's pre-modifying a word that is a noun, croatation. So the reason is because of the morphological derivation and because of its syntax, because it is in attributive position with respect to the noun, and that has to do with the theory of syntax. Is that clear? Okay, let's see if there's something else worth mentioning. These words in green, it means that you're not using the exact meta language. Of course, this is just the beginning of the year, but it's good to bear that in mind from the very beginning. For example, in this case, we can see that the child has already acquired the abstract patterns of English grammar. Abstract pattern? Which is the correct word? Which pattern has the child acquired? Not abstract pattern. Which would be the adjective? The basic pattern. The innate built-in patterns, the basic patterns, the built-in patterns of English grammar, as it can accurately express an affirmative sentence in its correct order. This is not the correct order in English. That is gone. It's the what. It's not, the word is not correct, the adjective. Is what type of order? The canonical order, the unmarked order, canonical, unmarked, usual if you want, basic word order, the basic word order, but not the correct. We are describing, this is not prescriptive grammar. Okay? Well, let's move on to another one. I think there was one, I want to say something about the articles. No, the next one. This was okay, the next one. And we are done. Acá. It says, which categories in Spanish grammar have no relevance for English and which categories are equally necessary in describing both English and Spanish? There are some categories in Spanish grammar which have no relevance for English grammar, such as the use of articles. No, articles are very important in both languages because it says in Spanish grammar it always requires an article before a noun, and when in English grammar we tend to drop it. No, we don't drop articles. We use the zero article. We only drop subject pronouns. Es un problema de meta language. We don't drop articles. We use the zero article. We don't retain the article. We simply use an article. And in Spanish, there's also zero articles. Si uno dice, tiene que entrar al teatro con corbata. Con corbata. La sopa se toma con cuchara. El dulce de batata se corta con cuchillo, no con el cuchillo, con un cuchillo, bueno, depende del contexto. También existe el zero article in Spanish. Y no es uno de los casos donde no sea relevante, es bien relevante. Quizás no relevante para chino, en chino no hay artículos. Entonces, directamente no hay artículos en chino, entonces ahí sí sería una categoría que no es relevante para el chino, pero sí es relevante para el español. Okay? And then they said, speaking about llueve and all that, moreover, in English, we always need a grammatical subject in the sentence, whether it is declarative or interrogative, so as to avoid fragments. While there are certain instances in Spanish, like in impersonal sentences, in which we drop the subject. ¿Cuál es el problema con decir we drop the subject in llueve? What's the problem? We're not dropping any subject because there's no subject. It's an impersonal construction. In the future, we are going to read that Di Tullio says that we can speak of a pro category, una categoría pro imaginaria, pero de cualquier manera es una categoría pro imaginaria que hace que conjuguemos el verbo en tercera persona y digamos llueve y no llueven. But you cannot say that there is dropping of the subject in that case. There is no subject. No necessity to have a subject. Well, we are, I think we are going to stop here. Let me have a quick scroll down just to have a quick look at the last ones and we stop. This was okay, move on, scroll down. This was very incomplete. So I would ask these groups for next class to give me a clearer example of, a clearer analysis. Group 12, that was Correct. Let's scroll down. Me parece que serán los últimos. A ver acá qué pasaba. Classmates stated the theory of... yes. Cuando están hablando de qué categoría existe en una lengua que no existe en la otra, acá categorías puede ser un tiempo, por ejemplo, la categoría de modo subjuntivo, eso es una categoría verbal de modo. La categoría de pasiva o activa. Pero the theory of principles and parameters is not a category. Is not a category. Next class, I'm going to, please remind me, I'm going to drop a word on this, okay? Well, finally, I'm going to advise you is that, well, you have to read How Language Works and the Tower of Babel. The Tower of both are important, both chapters are very important, but the Tower of Babel is a little bit more important than How Language Works. So if you read each of them twice, in the case of the Tower of Babel, read 3 times. Then I have left, we have uploaded some kind of guidelines, questions that you may, after you read these texts once or twice, go to those questions to see if they help you make more sense of what you're reading. Maria says, I didn't understand if we had to work with the sentences above or if we just had to explain. Well, Maria, can you, next class, can you ask me that question at the very beginning of the class and I will give some more examples? Okay, or you can also post it in the forum. Remember to use the forum, okay? And even if you don't post questions, you can read the exchanges. That will help. Okay, see you next Friday. Bye-bye. See you at 4, my assistant students. Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Laura, thank you.